A Harvard professor pointed his chalk at the black freshman in the doorway and said,
"Sweetheart, the cleaning staff entrance is around the back. You're embarrassing yourself."
I'm sorry, sir. Wrong room. I'll go.
The front row laughed.
6 months of my life are on that screen behind me. 6 months. A girl like you wouldn't understand in 6 lifetimes, so shoo.
I'm just looking for my class, sir.
My watch cost more than your scholarship. My name is on 3 textbooks in this building. You're a diversity quota with a backpack.
I never said I belonged, sir. I'm leaving.
Good. Try not to steal the chalk on your way out.
Yes, sir.
She had been at Harvard for 40 minutes. She glanced at his slide for 4 seconds. She found the mistake he had missed for 6 months. That last line still messes me up every single time I read it. I'm Kane Uncovers, and I dig up the stories rich men in expensive suits really, really wish you'd never hear. The girl standing in that doorway? 40 minutes into her Harvard life. 40 minutes. Yeah, buckle in. Her name was Taylor Sullivan, 18 years old, first day at Harvard Extension. The vinyl tag from the dorm key was still stuck to the strap of her backpack, and she had not yet learned how to peel it off without scratching the leather. She had a class to get to. Pre-Calculus 101, Science Center, room B12. The campus map in her hand had been printed on a tired old printer in the advisor's office that morning, and the letter B looked just enough like an E that she'd followed a stream of better-dressed students into the wrong building, the wrong floor, the wrong room. The wrong room was Carlson Hall. 400 seats, oak panels, brass fittings, a banner above the stage that read, "Resolving the Hallberg-Crane Conjecture, 6 months inside the hardest problem of the decade." She didn't know what Hallberg-Crane was. She didn't know who the man on the stage was. She just knew she was 15 minutes late for her first class in Boston. The man on the stage was Professor Edmund Williams, Department Chair of Mathematics. 3 textbooks, a foundational paper from 1998, tenure for life. The kind of man who spoke to donors with one voice and to graduate students with another. The kind of man who patted young white scholars warmly on the shoulder and asked young black students twice for their student ID at the door. 6 months earlier, he had sent an email to the department chair's office announcing that he had finally cracked Hallberg-Crane, his own personal Mount Everest. The conjecture had defeated mathematicians for almost 2 decades. He had not let anyone read the proof in detail. He had said with a small smile that he wanted to surprise the world. The world would be surprised, in fact, just not in the way he had planned. The room was packed. Faculty in the front, graduate students in the middle, public visitors in the back. A reporter from the Boston Globe named Margaret Holloway sat in the press section with her phone already recording. The lecture was streaming live to 11,000 viewers across 6 countries. The chair of the Mathematical Society was watching from his office in Providence. 2 of Williams's old rivals, both retired, were watching from their living rooms with whiskey in hand. They had been waiting decades for this man's victory lap, mostly so they could finally stop hearing about it. In the 3rd row sat Dean Anderson Brooks, senior faculty chair. Black, internationally respected number theorist. He sat several seats away from Williams. He was the kind of man who did not announce himself. He simply watched. He had read the abstract of the proof that morning. Something about line 4 had bothered him, and he had not been able to say why. In the very last row sat a postdoc named Sarah Whitman, late 30s, white, arms folded across her chest. She had been Williams's PhD student once. She had not spoken to him in 14 months. She had come tonight because she needed to see something with her own eyes. She had a folded printout in her jacket pocket. 18 months of time-stamped drafts. She had not decided yet what she was going to do with them. Now, here is something most people did not know about Taylor Sullivan. She read mathematics the way a musician hears a chord. Whole, at once, not line by line, not left to right. The whole shape of an idea lit up in her head like a single sound. She had been doing it since she was 13, sitting alone in the public library in Detroit, after her mother died, after the second foster home, after the school counselor had quietly suggested cosmetology. She thought everyone read math like that. She didn't know yet that this was the thing about her brain that was going to change rooms for the rest of her life. She had taught herself out of every textbook the Detroit Public Library owned. Apostle, Rudin. Then she had started reading published papers. Then she had started writing in the margins. By 16, she had filled 3 notebooks with her own conjectures. She had never shown them to anyone. She did not have anyone to show them to. She had a perfect score on the math section of the SAT. She had a partial scholarship to a small college outside Boston, and she had registered for one cross-listed course at Harvard Extension because she wanted to see what a real Harvard classroom looked like, just once. She had been at Harvard for 40 minutes. The security guard at the door, a man named Walter Briggs, had checked her ID twice on her way in. He hadn't checked anyone else's. She had not said anything. She had just held it up the second time and waited. In the audience, a young assistant professor named Helen Parker watched the security guard and watched the girl and felt something tighten in her chest. She did not say anything either. She had not been tenured yet. She had been told very clearly by Williams himself that the next 2 years of her life depended on her staying quiet during department events. Williams reached the final slide of his lecture. The conjecture, he said, had finally been put to bed. 6 months of work, 40 pages of proof. He invited questions. He expected polite ones from the faculty. He expected admiration from the donors. He expected the journal submission to land within the week and the $2 million Halberg Prize to follow within the year. Then the back door of the hall opened, and a black 18-year-old with a crumpled map walked into the wrong room and saw, in 4 seconds, that the bed was empty. What happens to a man like that when a girl like her sees what he hid? She was already turning to leave. He had already shooed her with his hand. The front row was already laughing. By every rule of the room, the moment was over. She just had to walk out and never look back. But her eyes drifted up, past Williams, past the laughing donors, past the rows of faculty already settling back into their notes, up to the screen behind his shoulder. Slide 22, the final slide, the crown of his proof. For 4 seconds, she did not move. Here is what nobody in that room understood yet. The slide was not text to her. The slide was not symbols. The slide was a chord, and the chord had a wrong note. She heard it before she could have named it. The kernel function on line 4. The continuity assumption. The conjecture was about even modular weight. The assumption only held for odd. And in the same 4 seconds, on the way to hearing the wrong note, she heard the right one. The one substitution that fixed it. The one move that made the rest of the proof fall into place by itself. 6 months of his life. 4 seconds of her attention. It was not arrogance. It was not even confidence. It was the same thing she had felt at 13, in the public library, when a paper she had never seen before suddenly made sense in the time it took to set down her coffee. Some people get songs that way. Some people get faces. She got mathematics. That was the deal her brain had made before she was old enough to ask for it. She turned to leave. She actually took a half step toward the door. And then, very quietly, almost to herself, she said, "Oh, line 4 doesn't hold for even weight. There's a substitution that fixes it." It was not loud. It was not meant for him. It was the kind of thing you mutter when you finally understand a crossword clue. But Williams heard it. The microphone caught it. 11,000 live stream viewers heard it. "I'm sorry," he said, with the warm tone he used right before destroying someone. "What did you say, young lady?" "I'm sorry, sir. Like I said, wrong room. I'll go." No, please. The freshman has a comment on my proof. Don't be shy. Front and center." He swept his hand toward the stage with theatrical politeness. The front row laughed again, on cue. He smiled. He thought he was setting a trap. He had set this trap before. Twice in the last semester alone, he had embarrassed a graduate student into silence in front of a packed seminar. Both of those students had eventually transferred. Both of them had been students of color. Williams did not see a pattern. He saw academic standards. She stood at the doorway with her crumpled map in her hand, and she felt something old wake up in her chest. The bus driver that morning who had asked if she had the right stop. The high school counselor who had handed her a brochure for cosmetology school. The foster mother who had said, with a kind of tired affection, that math was a white people thing. Every quiet hand on her shoulder, gently turning her toward a smaller life. She thought about leaving. Most 18-year-olds would have left. She did not leave. She started walking down the long center aisle. 400 pairs of eyes followed her. The clack of her shoes on the wooden floor was the only sound in the hall. She walked past the donors. She walked past Margaret Holloway, who was now standing up to film. She walked past Sarah Whitman, who, for the first time in 14 months, was smiling. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage. She set her crumpled map on the lectern. She set her backpack on the floor next to it. The dorm tag dangled. She did not pick up the chalk yet. She just looked at slide 22 on the big screen for 2 more seconds and gave a small, quiet nod to herself. The room held its breath. She had a class to find. She was already half an hour late. She also had something to say. What was she about to do in front of 400 people on her first day? She turned to the screen and pointed, not at the chalkboard, at the slide. Line 4, sir, the kernel function. You assumed continuity across the critical strip. That assumption holds for odd modular weight. The conjecture is about weight 2. Weight 2 is even. She lowered her hand. She did not write anything yet. She just stood there with her hand at her side. There was a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds. In that pause, Helen Parker, in the 5th row, covered her mouth with both hands. Margaret Holloway typed 3 words into her phone and then stopped typing. A graduate student near the back whispered, "Wait, is she right?" And another graduate student whispered back, "I think she's right." In the 3rd row, Brooks closed his eyes for a moment. The thing that had bothered him about the abstract that morning, the thing he had not been able to name, there it was, named, out loud, by a freshman. He took a slow breath and opened his eyes again. Williams smiled, the kind of smile that costs nothing on the way out. Identifying a flaw, he said, is one thing. Anyone can criticize. A trained second grader can point and say no. Proposing an alternative? That is mathematics. Show me the substitution that fixes it. Right now. 1 line. Let's see your move, young lady. He thought he was closing a door. What he didn't know was that the door had been open for 6 months. Williams himself had spent weeks on that exact step and failed. That was why he had eventually borrowed the move from Sarah Whitman's draft 18 months ago and called it his own. To him, there was no clean substitution. There was only theft. "Sir," she said, "the substitution is straightforward. May I write it on the board?" "Please, by all means. 1 line. That is what I asked for." She walked over to the chalkboard. She picked up the chalk. She turned back to him. "Just 1 line, sir? Or the full proof?" The room went still. Williams blinked. "Excuse me?" "You said the substitution is 1 line. The substitution is also the proof. Once it is written on the board, the rest of the argument is standard machinery. Halberg, 1986. Applied symmetrically. Any specialist in the field can fill it in. I'm asking which one you want." In the press section, Margaret Holloway said, out loud, to nobody in particular, "Oh my God, are you getting this?" Williams's face changed color, slowly, from the neck up. He was a man who had spent 30 years controlling rooms, and the room was no longer his. He could feel it the way you feel the temperature drop before rain. "That is an absurd claim," he said. His voice was tighter now. "The proof is 40 pages. It cannot be reduced to a single line. If you genuinely believe one substitution closes the entire conjecture, then write your line. We will see what the verifiers say. Brooks stood halfway up from his seat. Edmund, she is a freshman. On her first day. Stop. She volunteered the claim, Anderson. I am simply providing chalk. Taylor stood at the board with the chalk in her hand. She did not look afraid. She did not look excited. She looked the way a carpenter looks before measuring a board. Calm, practical, a little tired. Behind her eyes, the line was still there, exactly as it had been at the doorway, exactly as it had been 4 seconds in. The cord had not faded. It would not fade. It was waiting for her hand to catch up. She turned around and looked at Williams directly, not up at him, across at him. They were the same height on the stage. Sir, she said, before I write, may I ask one thing? What? Why are you so afraid I will? The room went so quiet you could hear the radiator clicking in the far corner of the hall. Williams did not answer. He could not answer, because the honest answer was that he had spent 6 months pretending to solve a problem he had never actually solved alone. And the girl in front of him had walked in by accident and seen the whole thing in 4 seconds. And the substitution he had stolen from his former graduate student was now about to be rewritten on his own chalkboard by an 18-year-old in a hoodie. That was the answer. He could not say it. So he said nothing. And the silence said it for him. The silence was so long that one of the donors in the second row coughed. Somebody else's chair creaked. A man in a navy blazer near the door checked his watch and then forgot to lower his arm. Sarah Whitman in the back row watched his face and finally let herself smile. Not a bitter smile, a small, surprised, vindicated smile. The kind of smile a person earns over 14 months of waiting. Her hand went, very slowly, to her jacket pocket. She felt the folded printout there. 18 months of time-stamped drafts. She did not take them out yet. She just rested her hand against them, like a person resting against a door they were finally ready to open. In the third row, Brooks sat back down slowly. He did not say a word. He just folded his hands and watched. Helen Parker quietly moved 1 seat closer to the front. She did not even know she was doing it. 2 years of being told to stay quiet at department events. She felt one of those years drop off her shoulders. Just like that. Walter Briggs, the security guard who had checked Taylor's ID twice that morning, was still standing near the side door. He had not left. His arms were crossed. He had taken 3 steps closer to the stage without realizing it. 31 years of working at this institution. He had seen every kind of person Harvard had to offer. He had also seen every kind of thing Harvard tried to bury. He knew the difference. Taylor turned back to the chalkboard. She still had not written anything. She had a single line in her head, sitting there as clear as it had been at the doorway. She waited, because she could feel what was coming. She had not been raised to be naive. She knew exactly what a man like Williams did when he was cornered in public. He did not concede. He stalled. He moved the goalposts. He invented procedure. He made up rules. He bought time. She had heard the chord. She knew what was coming next was not going to be the math. The math was easy. The math was already done. Was the room going to let her finish? Okay, I gotta jump in here. Did you catch what just happened? An 18-year-old kid, day 1 at Harvard, looked a tenured professor dead in the eye and asked him why he was scared of her. And the man, with 3 textbooks and a watch worth more than her entire scholarship, he just stood there. Couldn't answer. Couldn't even fake an answer. And that silence right there, that's the whole story. The math was already over. He just hadn't admitted it yet. Williams walked behind the lectern and adjusted his microphone. He cleared his throat in the way that important men clear their throats when they are buying time. Actually, he said, On reflection, this is not appropriate. We have protocols at this institution. The young lady is not enrolled in the mathematics department. She cannot simply walk up onto a Harvard stage and write on a Harvard chalkboard. There are rules. Brooks's voice came back, dry as paper. Edmund, you literally just told her to write the line. I rescind. The Q&A is concluded. We are moving on with the program. He turned to the audio-visual booth at the back of the hall. Cut the live stream. We are concluding the public portion. The young woman running the audio-visual desk hesitated. She looked at her supervisor. Her supervisor looked at the floor. The supervisor was 32 years old. He had 2 children and a mortgage. He also had a pair of eyes, and he had used them for the last 12 minutes. He gave the smallest possible shake of his head. The young woman did not cut the feed. Margaret Holloway stood up in the press section and said, loudly, "For the record, Professor, the Boston Globe is recording independently. So is the Mathematical Society's media outlet. Cutting your feed will not cut ours." Williams turned to security. "Walter, please escort the young lady out. She has wandered far enough." Walter Briggs did not move. He uncrossed his arms. He looked Williams in the eye, across half a hall, and said, very calmly, "Sir, with respect. She has a valid student ID. I checked it twice this morning myself. I am not removing a student who has not done anything wrong. That is an order from the department chair. You are not my chair, sir. I work for facilities." He did not raise his voice. He did not move. He just stood where he was. 31 years on this campus. He had been told to remove students before. He had done it twice in his entire career. Both times because the student had actually done something, not because a tenured professor was scared of one. A small, strange thing happened in the hall. Somebody clapped. Just once, a single pair of hands, and then somebody else clapped, and then about 30 people in the back rows clapped, briefly, almost embarrassed by themselves. Williams's jaw tightened. "Fine," he said. "If she wants to write, she does so under departmental verification. 3 verifiers, hand-picked by me. Journal-grade rigor. Any single objection from a verifier and she sits down." He pointed to 2 of his own graduate students in the front row. They stood up. They were both nervous. They were both his. The first one, Gregory Anderson, was a 4th-year doctoral candidate. He had been trying to find an honest way to leave Williams's lab for almost a year. He had not yet found the courage. He stood up because he was told to. Then a third voice came from the back. "I volunteer as the 3rd verifier, in the interest of fairness." It was Sarah Whitman. Williams turned. He saw her face. For just 1 second, before he could stop it, his expression flickered. It was not anger. It was something colder. It was recognition. He knew exactly who she was. He knew exactly what was in her phone. He knew exactly what she had been waiting 14 months to do. He could not say no, because saying no in front of 400 people, 2 cameras, and a Boston Globe reporter would look like exactly what it was. So he said yes, too quickly. "Fine. Dr. Whitman is the 3rd verifier." She walked down the aisle and took a seat in the front row. She did not look at him as she passed. She did not need to. "And one final condition," Williams said. "The result must be submitted in writing to my office. I will personally review the substitution over 6 to 8 weeks in consultation with the department. We do not make academic determinations on a live stream." There it was. 6 to 8 weeks. The math could be on the board in 30 seconds. He wanted 6 to 8 weeks. He needed time to prepare a counterpaper, to call in favors, to publish first, to bury whatever was in line 14 before anyone else got to read it carefully. 6 to 8 weeks was the sound of a man trying to outrun a girl who had already passed him. Brooks stood again. "Edmund, stop. This is harassment. This is academic standards, Anderson." Taylor stood at the chalkboard. The chalk was still in her hand. She had not written a single symbol. 12 minutes had passed since she pointed at slide 22. Now, Here is the part that gets me. The math she did in 4 seconds. The hard part wasn't her brain. The hard part was just being allowed to use it. 12 full minutes of grown men with PhDs trying to find a procedural reason an 18-year-old shouldn't be allowed to write one line on a chalkboard. Wild. Just wild. Taylor stood very still. She looked at the chalk in her hand. She looked at Williams, who was now smiling that thin, tight smile of a man who believed he had just won. She set the chalk back down on the tray. She stepped away from the board. She walked back across the stage, picked up her crumpled map, picked up her backpack, and started toward the steps. She had a class to find. She was 43 minutes late, and the room she had walked into had just told her in the politest possible language that she did not get to finish what she had come to say. Was she really about to walk out? She made it down the 3 steps from the stage. She made it 5 rows up the center aisle. She did not look at anyone. She did not have to. She knew exactly what every face in that room was doing. The donors were nodding politely at Williams's procedural triumph. The graduate students were staring at their laps because they knew, but they were untenured, and they were quiet, and they were sorry. Helen Parker was on her feet, halfway through a sentence that would not come out. Williams had cut her off the second she opened her mouth. "Dr. Parker, you are not tenured. Please sit down." Helen sat down. Her face went red. She looked at her shoes. Taylor kept walking. Here is what most people do not see. Taylor was not tired from the math. The math was done. The math had been done since the doorway. Taylor was tired from the room, from the foster mother who had told her math was a white people thing, from the high school counselor who had handed her the cosmetology brochure, from the bus driver that morning who had asked, gently, if she was sure she had the right stop, from the man on the stage who had just turned a 4-second answer into a 6-week paperwork problem. She was tired in the way that only certain people get tired. It was not the tiredness of working too hard. It was the tiredness of being asked over and over again to prove a thing that the room had already made up its mind to disbelieve. You can be the best chord hearer in the world. If the room turns the music off every time you walk in, the music does not matter. She thought about leaving, not because she could not finish, because finishing did not seem to be allowed. She got to row 12. She got to row 8. She got to row 5. The double doors were 10 more steps. She could see the lobby through the glass. There was a water fountain. There was a sign for the restrooms. There was a hallway that led, eventually, back to Science Center, room B12, where her real first class was probably halfway through introductions by now. The professor of that pre-calculus class was named Dr. Roberts. He liked his students to introduce themselves by saying one thing they had ever learned outside of school. She had thought about it on the bus. She had been planning to say, "The year I turned 13, I taught myself complex analysis from a library book." She had been a little nervous about saying it. Now she was a little tired of being the kind of person who had to be nervous about saying it. She got to the back row. And then a voice came from the 3rd row. Calm, slow, final. Edmund. Brooks was on his feet, senior faculty chair, black, 62 years old, tweed jacket, wire-rimmed glasses. As senior faculty chair of this institution, which, for the record, supersedes department chair, I am invoking Article 4 of the Academic Freedom Bylaws. Any individual present at a public lecture on this campus may demonstrate mathematics on a public chalkboard, with or without your permission. He turned. He looked down the center aisle. Taylor had stopped walking. She was holding the door handle. "Ms. Sullivan," he said, "the board is yours. Please, continue." Taylor did not turn around right away. She stood at the door with her hand on the handle. She looked through the glass into the lobby. She thought about it. Then, behind her, somebody started clapping. Walter Briggs first. A single pair of hands again. Then Helen Parker stood up for the 2nd time, and this time she did not sit back down. Then a graduate student. then the back rows, then the middle. The applause did not roar. It did not need to. It just kept going, steady, patient, the kind of applause that was not for a performance, the kind of applause that was for a person. Taylor let go of the door handle. She turned around. She walked back. Past row 12, past row 8, past row 5, up the 3 steps, across the stage. She set her crumpled mat back down on the lectern. She set her backpack back down on the floor. She picked up the chalk. She had been told she did not belong since she was old enough to count. She had just been told it again, by a man with 30 years of authority, 6 months of fraud, and exactly 4 seconds less than her. The bravest thing in the room that night was not the line she was about to write. The bravest thing was the fact that, after 12 minutes of being told no, she still believed the line was worth writing. What was she going to do with 30 seconds? She turned to face the chalkboard. She did not glance back at Williams. She did not glance at the audience. She did not glance at the slide on the screen, which was still showing line 4 with its broken assumption. She had already seen the slide. She had seen it from the doorway, at 4 seconds, and she had been carrying the answer in her head ever since. She raised the chalk. She wrote. The line was not long. It was about 15 symbols. It started on the left side of the board and ended a little past the middle. It involved a substitution from one space into another, a symmetry that nobody in Williams's framework had named, and a short reduction that pointed, like an arrow, straight at a paper Halberg had published in 1986. Williams had cited that paper in his bibliography. He had never connected it back. He had been holding the answer the whole time and pointing the wrong end of it at the problem. Her handwriting was small, tidy, practical, the kind of handwriting that came from years of writing in the margins of library books, the kind of handwriting that did not waste space because the space was not hers to waste. She set the chalk down on the tray. She stepped back from the board. The clock on the wall, for anyone who had been watching it, read 23 seconds since she picked up the chalk. The hall went absolutely silent. For 5 full seconds, nobody in the room said anything. You could hear the radiator clicking. You could hear somebody's phone vibrating on a chair. You could hear, faintly, a bus going by on the street outside. Then Gregory Anderson, one of Williams's hand-picked graduate verifiers, stood up from the front row. He had been studying the board the whole time. He walked up to the stage. He climbed the 3 steps. He stood in front of the chalkboard, 2 feet from the line Taylor had written, and he read it once, and he read it again, and his face went the color of paper. He turned around. He looked at Williams. His mouth opened. He closed it. He opened it again. "Edmund," he said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "Edmund, this is the substitution. This closes the gap on line 4. Williams said, very fast, "It is one line. It does not prove the conjecture." "Edmund," Gregory said, "with this substitution, the rest of the proof is standard machinery. Halberg, 1986, applied symmetrically. Any graduate student in the field can fill in the rest in an afternoon. The hard part, the missing move, she just wrote it on the board." He stepped back from the chalkboard like it was a hot stove. Then, very quietly, almost like he was apologizing, he added, "I have been trying to find that step for 9 months, Edmund. We all have, in your lab. Nobody has ever written what she just wrote. Nobody." It was the first honest thing he had said in front of his advisor in a year. Sarah Whitman stood up next. She walked, slowly, up the 3 steps. She stood in front of the chalkboard. She did not move for a long time. Then she turned, and she looked at Williams. Not angrily, not even sadly, just clearly. "It is the move, Edmund," she said. "It is the move I spent 18 months looking for and never found. I never found it because I was looking through your framework. She was not in your framework. She was in the doorway." The third verifier, the second hand-picked graduate student, climbed the steps last. He was the youngest of the 3. He was a second year. He had been told, before the lecture started, exactly what to say if any objection came up. He had practiced the words in the bathroom that morning. He was supposed to say, "The substitution lacks rigor." He had practiced it 3 times in the mirror. He read the line on the board. He stood there for almost 30 seconds. Then, very quietly, almost to the chalk, he said, "It just works. It just works." He did not look at Williams when he said it. There was no applause yet. The room was still processing. People were still looking at each other, trying to confirm that what had just happened had actually just happened. Margaret Holloway was dictating into her phone, full speed, the lead paragraph of a story that would run on the front page of the Boston Globe the next morning. Then Walter Briggs, the security guard, the man who had checked Taylor's ID twice that morning, started clapping. One pair of hands, steady, slow, unhurried. Then Brooks stood up and clapped. Then Helen Parker, who was already standing. Then the back rows. Then the middle. Then, last, 2 of the senior faculty in the front row looked at Williams, looked at each other, and stood up. And then one more. And then another. And then, eventually, the entire hall was standing. Williams was not standing. He was sitting in the front row, both hands flat on the armrests of his chair. His face was not red anymore. His face was nothing. It was the face of a man whose hands had finally caught up with him. Taylor stayed where she was. She did not bow. She did not smile. She did not raise her hand. She just stood next to the chalkboard, with her crumpled map on the lectern and her backpack on the floor, and she waited. When the applause finally started to fade, Williams stood up from his seat. He walked to the lectern. He cleared his throat. He tried to take back the room. "It is," he said. "It is not rigorous. There are gaps. There are gaps." Taylor turned to him. Her voice was very quiet. "Where, sir?" I would have to review." "Take your time, sir. The verifiers can start." Sarah Whitman, still standing on the stage, said, very evenly, "I have started, Edmund. It is complete in spirit. It is correct in detail. And it is substantially more elegant than the version printed in tonight's program. The substitution she wrote replaces 6 pages of your proof with 1 line. That is not a gap. That is the answer." She did not look at Williams when she said it. She looked at the line on the board. She looked at it the way you look at something you have been searching for a very long time. Williams stood at the lectern. He gripped the wood with both hands. He opened his mouth to say something, and then he closed it, and then he opened it again, and what came out was the sentence that, by sunrise, would be clipped, captioned, and reposted 17 million times. "I will need to review my own paper before I can comment further." He had opened the night calling her young lady. He closed it, asking permission to read his own work. The applause started again, louder this time. Not a polite applause. The kind of applause that has been holding its breath for 12 minutes and is finally allowed to exhale. Taylor walked back across the stage. She picked up her crumpled map. She picked up her backpack. The dorm tag dangled. She walked down the 3 steps, past Brooks, past Helen Parker, past Walter Briggs, and back up the center aisle. She still had a class to find. She was 46 minutes late. What happens to a man whose entire career was built on 1 borrowed line? I'm going to be straight with you. I went looking for this story because I was angry. Years ago, I sat in the room a lot like Carlson Hall. I had the right answer. And I didn't say it. I let a man in a suit talk over me until the moment passed. And that night, walking home, I told myself I'd never let it happen again. Spoiler, it happened again. Twice. So when I heard about the freshman in the doorway, the one who did what I never could, I had to dig. Not because she's me, because she's the version of me that didn't flinch. The applause was still fading when Margaret Holloway stood up in the press section. She did not raise her hand. Reporters do not raise their hands. She just stood, and she waited until enough of the room turned to look at her that her voice would carry without a microphone. "Professor Williams," she said, "I have been forwarded a series of time-stamped electronic drafts from 18 months ago. They contain the central substitution that Ms. Sullivan just wrote on the board. The drafts are authored, in metadata, by Dr. Sarah Whitman. Could you comment?" The room, which had finally been getting ready to breathe again, stopped breathing. Williams said, "I have no idea what you are referring to." Sarah Whitman, from her seat on the stage, said very calmly, "Edmund, I sent you that substitution on March 14th of last year. You replied to me on March 16th, calling it, and I am quoting your email, too underdeveloped to publish. I have the email, I have the draft, I have the metadata, and I forwarded all of it, 23 minutes ago, to the Journal of Number Theory Ethics Committee, the Provost's office, and to Ms. Holloway. I forwarded it the moment you tried to send an 18-year-old freshman away with paperwork." She paused. She was not done. "I want to be clear, Edmund. I did not come here tonight to expose you. I came here tonight to see if you would do it again, to another student, to a student younger than I was, to a student with even less power than I had. You did. So now, I am exposing you." William sat down. Not in the front row this time, in a seat closer to the back, a seat that was not his. Brooks turned to him. His voice was flat and final. "Edmund, I would suggest you not comment further until counsel is present." The hall stayed silent. Nobody moved. The verifiers were still standing on the stage. The chalkboard still had one line on it. The slide on the screen behind Williams still showed line 4, frozen, waiting for the substitution that was now, very plainly, sitting one chalk line away. Now the room understood the 12 minutes. Now the room understood the paperwork. Now the room understood why one substitution, written by a freshman in 23 seconds, had frightened a tenured Harvard professor more than the freshman herself. For 6 months, he had been counting on one thing. Nobody would ever look at the substitution closely enough to recognize whose handwriting was underneath it. He had not planned for a girl who could see the whole thing in one glance. In the 5th row, a 16-year-old girl in a navy dress stood up. She had been sitting next to a woman who had to be her mother. She had Williams's chin and Williams's eyes, and she did not look at him as she walked up the aisle and out the back of the hall. She did not slam the door behind her. She just closed it. What happens after a daughter sees her father in public for what he actually is? The hashtag started in under an hour. Hashtag #OneGlance. By midnight, 8 million views on TikTok. By morning, 50 million. The clip everyone shared was the same clip. 23 seconds of a black 18-year-old in a hoodie writing one line on a Harvard chalkboard, and then 400 people, slowly, one by one, standing up. By 4 hours, the Journal of Number Theory had pulled the Halberg Crane paper from its pre-publication queue. By 12 hours, the American Mathematical Society announced a formal inquiry into the authorship of the proof. By 24 hours, Harvard had quietly informed Edmund Williams that he was being placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of an internal review. By 48 hours, the headline was running on every national news site in the country. Harvard professor's 6-month proof solved by black freshmen in one glance. And it wasn't his to begin with. Other things happened too. Smaller things. The kind of things that do not make headlines, but that, over time, make the world a slightly different shape. 3 women came forward, separately, with stories about Williams from earlier in his career. 2 graduate students, one current and one former, asked to be reassigned to a different advisor. A professor at another university wrote a long, careful op-ed about what the Halberg Crane night meant, and what it had revealed, and what it had not. The op-ed was not about Taylor. The op-ed was about every room like Carlson Hall, and every line like the one she had written, and every door like the one she had walked through. Back inside Carlson Hall that night, while the cameras were still rolling and Williams was still sitting in a seat that was not his, Helen Parker walked up the center aisle. She did not say anything. She just sat down in the empty seat next to Taylor, who had stopped halfway up the aisle when Margaret Holloway stood up. They sat there together for a long time. Helen did not introduce herself. She did not need to. Walter Briggs stood at the back of the hall, near the side door. When Taylor finally stood up to leave, he gave her a small, professional nod, like a man at the end of a long shift. Sarah Whitman did not get up from her seat on the stage. She stayed where she was for almost an hour. She let herself finally, after 14 months, cry. Quietly, privately, like a person setting down something very heavy. Sometimes courage is loud. Sometimes courage is checking a student ID twice and then refusing to remove her. Sometimes courage is a senior faculty member invoking Article 4. Sometimes courage is sitting down in a different chair, in public, where everyone can see you. He had built his career on being the smartest man in the room. He had lost it, in front of the entire country, on being the dishonest one. The math had a witness. His daughter had a witness. The chalkboard had a witness. And 8 million people, by morning, had a clip. What does a black girl do the morning after her face is on the front page of every paper in America? She took the bus. She took the same bus she took every morning. Earbuds in, backpack between her feet, a copy of Halberg's 1986 paper on her lap, open to page 4, with a yellow pen in her hand and a coffee stain on the corner. She was reading the section on standard machinery. She wanted to verify, line by line, what the verifiers had told the room about her substitution. She did not trust other people's word for math, even when the word was nice, even when the word was hers. The headline on the front page of the Boston Globe, on the rack at the bus stop, was about her. She did not look at it. A woman across the aisle on the bus recognized her from the clip and started to say something, then stopped, then quietly nodded instead. Taylor nodded back. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Walter Briggs was standing at the door of Science Center when she arrived. He did not check her ID this time. He just nodded. "Pre-calc, ma'am?" he said. "B12, down the hall, second left. You'll be on time today." "Thank you, Mr. Briggs." "It's Walter." She walked into B12 at 5 minutes to 9. The professor was Dr. Roberts. He was a kind man. He was halfway through writing his name on the board. He looked up when she walked in. He looked at her for 1 second longer than he would have looked at any other student. He did not say anything about it. He just smiled and pointed her toward an open seat. When it was her turn to introduce herself, she said, "I'm Taylor. The year I turned 13, I taught myself complex analysis from a library book." Dr. Roberts smiled. "Welcome to pre-calculus, Taylor." By lunchtime, Dean Anderson Brooks called her phone. He offered her a fully funded research position, working under his supervision, starting immediately. She thanked him. She asked for 2 days to think about it. She had paid for her pre-calc textbook. She had registered for the class. She did not like to leave things half-finished. Williams's statement was released that afternoon. It was 4 sentences long. It said, in the most carefully worded English that an attorney could produce, that he deeply regretted the mischaracterization of authorship in his recent work, and the manner in which he had addressed Ms. Sullivan during the lecture, and that both fell short of the standards of the institution. It was the most expensive sentence of his life. It changed nothing about what he had actually done. It was on the record, forever. 3 months later, the Halberg-Crane conjecture was republished in the Journal of Number Theory under a new title. On a single substitution, closing the Halberg-Crane conjecture. The lead author was Sullivan, T. The co-author was Whitman, S. The acknowledgments thanked Dean Anderson Brooks, Dr. Helen Parker, and Mr. Walter Briggs. The paper was 6 pages long, not 40, because once you had the right line, the rest was, in fact, standard machinery. Williams's name was not on the paper. Williams's name by then was no longer at Harvard. I told this story because I needed to. I have watched too many brilliant people get talked over by people who only sounded brilliant. If you have ever walked into the wrong room and been told you didn't belong, I see you. The math always knows. so do the people who matter. What does a girl like that say 6 months later, on the same stage where it all started? 6 months later, she stood on the same stage. The hall was packed again. Different audience this time. First-year students mostly. Some high school kids bust in from public schools across Massachusetts. A scholarship program for girls in mathematics. Brooks had organized it. Helen Parker had written the invitation. Taylor wore the same hoodie. The same backpack was on the floor next to her. The dorm tag was still hanging on the strap, slightly more faded now. She had grown her hair out a little. That was all. She wrote one line on the chalkboard. She turned around. "Hi, I'm Taylor. I read math the way some people hear music. I didn't know that was unusual until last fall. People keep asking me how I solved a 6-month problem in one glance, so I want to tell you the truth. I didn't solve it in one glance. I saw it in one glance. Those are different things. The math wasn't hard. Being allowed to write it down was. If any of you sees things in one glance, and you have ever been told you don't belong in rooms like this, I want you to know 2 things. 1. You do. 2. Don't wait for permission to write on the board." She set the chalk down. She picked up her backpack. The dorm tag dangled. She walked off the stage. Walter Briggs held the door for her on her way out. Taylor still takes the bus to class. She still studies in the same library corner. She still gets asked, sometimes, if she is lost. And she still answers the way she always has. Politely, briefly. Then she goes back to her work. Because the work was never about him. It was never about proving anything to the room. It was about the math. It was always about the math. She just happened to see it. In one glance. If this hit something in you, leave a comment with one word. The moment in your life when you saw something nobody else did. Just one word. I will read every one. Subscribe. Share. Pass it to the person who needs it.